Well, Ron, we talk about legislative proposals, and one of them that my understanding is that's come before the Senate would be to ban people on the terrorist watch list from being able to purchase guns. The shooter, Omar Mateen, my understanding, fits this category. But Ron, even after Sandy Hook, you voted against this in the past.
No. First of all, I voted.
Clarify your position. I don't mean to mischaracterize, Ron.
First of all, I don't know anybody who wants to see terrorists or potential terrorists have access to weapons, any weapon, much less a gun. What is being misinterpreted here is these terror watch lists. You've got a great big database with literally 1 million plus names on it. Tens of thousands of Americans with scraps of information, completely unverified. And from that database, a number of lists are developed for different law enforcement purposes. Again, some of those lists have tens of thousands of Americans on that. The vast majority of those people on those lists, by the way, are foreigners, and they can't buy guns. And so we're talking about subsets after subsets. So we need to understand, because nobody does, it's classified, what are the criteria for coming up on that list? What kind of due process would an American citizen have to, basically challenge their being on that list?
But Ron,
so the bottom line is, I voted for a Cornyn amendment that would have done it, but with due process, protecting constitutional rights. That doesn't get reported in the press, but what I'm hoping will happen in the wake of this, and by the way, this terrorist was taken off the list. It wouldn't have worked in this case. But those that jump to conclusion and offer a gun control solution, the hurdle they're never able to really surmount is show us how your piece of legislation would have actually prevented so many of these other tragedies, and generally they can't prove that. And so, I'm very, very cautious about passing any legislation that will further infringe on our constitutional rights. We actually need to accomplish President Obama's stated goal when it comes to ISIS. He stated it 22 months ago, to defeat ISIS. There's the root cause. That's where our attention ought to be played. What arms should Americans keep? But I think, let's face it, because they actually banned those types of weapons, in the Clinton era, it didn't work. All the data came in, it had no effect whatsoever, and they let that ban expire.
I've seen contrary evidence, Ron. I've seen that actually since the expiration of the Brady Bill.
That's because you're reading all the liberal blogs.
Well, the New York Times, the Washington Post, sir.
If you actually look at the real information, Mike, you'd find out that what I'm saying is true.
Well, Senator, what information are you looking at that we could look at and verify that?
Well, just take a look at the Wall Street Journal did an excellent job in reviewing Outlook today, laying out the facts in terms of murder rates and stuff. Take a look at that. There's a good source right there.
Ron, let me ask you, there are those that would say your opposition to any change, any new sort of assault weapons ban might stem from the fact that you have been a major recipient of money from the gun industry, sir. According to the Sunlight Foundation, $1.3 million in contributions. That's the highest amongst the Wisconsin congressional.
How could they possibly come up with that?
Ron, do you think you've received substantial donations from the gun industry?
I have no idea. That's got to be a fantasy. I have no idea how anybody would come up with a figure like that. Guys, again, you're distracting from the real issue. If you want to prevent these Islamic terror-inspired or at some point in time directed terrorist attacks, we need to address the real root cause of the problem, and that is defeating ISIS. The more we talk about these issues that literally are corollary, they're distractions from actually addressing the root cause, which is let's defeat Islamic terror. Let's commit ourselves as a nation, as a civilized world. Let's recognize the harm, the damage, the loss of freedoms that Islamic terror has caused the civilized world for decades. Let's finally commit ourselves to ridding us of this scourge once and for all. Rather than concentrating in areas of disagreement, and let's face it, guys, point to whatever piece of legislation you want to in terms of additional gun control or further reduction of our freedoms, and ask yourself, would it really solve the problem? There are 350 million guns in America. What are you going to do? What are you going to really do? How are you going to keep
the Australians
out of the hands of a determined terrorist? Again, it's legislation that maybe sounds good that can be used as a political wedge issue. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does reduce our freedoms. And I'm actually a staunch defender of constitutional rights. Nobody supports allowing a terrorist or potential terrorist from access to buying a gun. So it's how do you actually accomplish it without trampling on constitutional rights or rights to due process? Guys, we don't even know what the criteria is for the no-fly list or for the selectee list. Okay, because it's classified. So, hey, Mike, how would you like it if you were all of a sudden for whatever? Let's say a coworker, maybe Dom got a little ticked off, just called into the informant as an informant in the FBI, and all of a sudden you're on one of these lists. How would you like that? How would you like your rights to be infringed upon in some way, shape, or form?
Well, it depends on if I'd have made terrorist threats, Ron.
That's what we're talking about.
But this man did make terrorist threats, this Omar Mateen.
What I'm talking about, these broader lists, is what the Feinstein Amendment was about. This is more complex than it's being played up in the media, or, quite honestly, that the folks on the other side of the aisle are trying to make a political wedge issue out of this. So I'll concentrate on the shared goal of keeping guns and weapons away from terrorists and suspected terrorists. I'm happy to share that goal. I'm happy to work in a bipartisan fashion to get a real result on something that really works, that does not infringe upon our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms or our right to due process or other constitutional rights.
Well, Ron, I don't want anyone to give up due process, sir, but the NRA and the gun manufacturing lobby...
That is exactly what the Feinstein Amendment would do.
But, Ron,
it would give up due process.
These pro-gun groups put a lot of money in making sure there are no meaningful changes. Ron, are thoughts and prayers enough? I mean, isn't it our job to solve these problems? When we have a mass shooting almost effectively every day in our country, sir, at some point, don't we have to say the Second Amendment is not enough rationale or reason to allow this to continue? Ron, shouldn't we have something more than thoughts and prayers to offer our people?
Mike, I want to make sure that every Wisconsinite, every American has the right to defend themselves in their own home. Okay? I want to protect that Second Amendment right, which has been confirmed by the Supreme Court as an individual right. And again, if you're talking about Orlando, or San Bernardino, or Chattanooga, or Fort Hood, Texas, or the foiled plot in Milwaukee, the root cause of those problems was Islamic terrorists. That is what we need to address, and we're not effectively addressing it. There's a solution.
Senator, certainly that's a solution to the ISIS and radical Islamic problem, but the overall problem, which every one of these crimes can be included into, is hate.